The Lord Buddha, thus surrounded and venerated by these multitudes of many hundreds of thousands of living beings, sat upon a majestic lion throne and began to teach the Dharma. Dominating all the multitudes, just as Sumeru, the king of mountains, looms high over the oceans, the Lord Buddha shone, radiated, and glittered as he sat upon his magnificent lion throne. Thereupon the merchant bodhisattva, Ratnakara, with 500 merchant youths, each holding a precious parasol made of 7 different kinds of jewels, came forth from the city of Vasali, and presented himself at the grove of Amrapali. Each approached the Buddha, bowed at his feet, circumambulated him clockwise 7 times, laid down his precious parasol in offering, and withdrew to one side. As soon as all these precious parasols had been laid down, suddenly, by the miraculous power of the Lord, they were transformed into a single precious canopy, so great that it formed a covering for this entire billion-world galaxy. The surface of the entire billion-world galaxy was reflected in the interior of the great precious canopy, where the total content of this galaxy could be seen. Limitless mansions of suns, moons, and stellar bodies, the realms of the Devas, Nagas, Yakshas, Gandharvas, Asuras, Garudas, Kimnaras, and Maharagas, as well as the realm of the 4 Maharajas, the king of the mountains, Mount Sumeru, Mount Himadri, Mount Mucilinda, Mount Mahamucilinda, Mount Gandhamandana, Mount Ratnapavata, Mount Kalapavata, Mount Chakravada, Mount Mahachakravada. All the great oceans, rivers, bays, torrents, streams, brooks, and springs. Finally, all the villages, suburbs, cities, capitals, provinces, and wildernesses. All this could be clearly seen by everyone, and the voices of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions could be heard proclaiming their teachings of the Dharma in all the worlds, the sounds reverberating in the space beneath the great precious canopy. At this vision of the magnificent miracle effected by the supernatural power of the Lord Buddha, the entire host was ecstatic, enraptured, astonished, delighted, satisfied, and filled with awe and pleasure. They all bowed down to the Tathagata, withdrew to one side with palms pressed together, and gazed upon him with fixed attention. So here we have the miracle of the parasols, as it appears in the Vimalakirti Nadesha Sutra. And it's one of a number of miraculous events that takes place in this sutra. And perhaps just to say a couple of things about this first of all. These miracles, or these miraculous events, are quite common in the Mahayana Sutra, and they seem to be there for a purpose, to produce a sense of awe in us, to produce a sense of the wondrousness within us, not only of the Buddha, but also of the true nature of things. We remember that in Buddhism, the point of the teachings is actually to see things as they really are, to see what's called the true nature of things. And every so often in these sutras, some kind of almost visionary experience will happen, and the witnesses will get a glimpse of this just for a moment. And actually, if we think back, it may well be for those who are following a Buddhist practice, who perhaps have a regular and established mindfulness or daily life practice, who also are practicing zazen, sitting meditation, and perhaps those who've been on retreats as well. When we really go into that quiet, that sometimes quite early on in the training, there is an experience. Something actually does open up just for a moment. And this has a technical term. This has a technical word connected with it. It's called the bodhicitta. And it's believed and said that quite often this can happen, that the bodhicitta, just for a moment, it opens. Bodhicitta, bodhi meaning awakening, chitta meaning the heart that yearns for awakening, or the heart that is awake. It's said in another sutra, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, that all beings are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom and the power of the Buddha nature, this true reality, this way of seeing that is already clear and awakened and a fully functioning Buddha heart. And at the beginning, it's opened up. And it provides an incentive, calls us, acts like a vocation, coming from the Latin vocare, meaning to call. It calls us to practice, calls us to make an effort, because very quickly it closes up again. And then we really do feel that pain of an absence, that sense of lack. And so that is what provides the motivation. That is the bodhicitta, the call to walk the path, to walk particularly the bodhisattva path to full Buddhahood. So these miraculous events are something akin to that. A little bit in the ordinary daily life, particularly when we get downhearted, we can believe, nothing's going to change. It's always going to be like this. The meditation practice doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly, out of the blue, something happens. And this is important, actually, because too easily we can get stuck on the sort of my efforts and my progress. And of course, it's nothing to do with that. All we're really called to do is to just give ourselves once more, wholeheartedly, into what at this moment is being done. And when a thought of I comes up, again, just to give myself away wholeheartedly back into the doing. And it's the practice itself, of course, that produces the effect. And most of the time we cannot see the changes. In fact, I remember Venerable Myokyoni often saying that true insight is by hindsight. That is, that we suddenly become aware that something's changed, that something has dropped off. And we may not have even noticed it for the time, but for quite a while, but suddenly looking back, it's happened. So clearly things are happening outside of my conscious awareness, outside certainly of my intentions, outside of my conscious will. But yet things do happen when we follow this practice, and they do. This practice is 2,500 years old. It's not even peculiar to the Zen school. Methods and specific meditation practices may differ between the schools, but the not only are the principles on which those practices are based the same. Actually, many of the practices are very similar too. The other thing to say about these miraculous events also is that there's a certain visionary quality about them, and many scholars now do consider that they may have been originally visions that some of the forest-dwelling monks may have had arising from their meditation practice. But, and this is something now that's important before we go rushing off looking for visions now, it's one thing to have a vision, and in fact, to be perfectly honest, it's not too difficult to have visions. One can go into remote environments and living there for a while, with a little bit of privation, visions will come. These are waking dreams. People in ordinary life also have waking visions. They're actually not that uncommon, although people generally don't like to talk about them. But it's one thing to have those visions, but it's another to be able to interpret them and to be able to, as it were, dig out the Dharma from them. And this is really the brilliance, the genius of the sutras. Not only were these visions, but they were also vehicles for the Dharma as well, and often introduced nuances or opened up or excavated different or slightly more subtle and profound interpretations of the original teachings. So here we have now the Buddha. He's at the city of Vasali. He's surrounded by many hundreds of thousands of living beings, and he's sat on his majestic lion throne. The lion, of course, being the animal of the Buddha. We've had that before. And he begins to teach the Dharma. And it says, dominating all the multitudes, just as Sumeru, the king of mountains, looms high over the oceans. And Sumeru is, just to remind ourselves, is the world mountain. According to Hindu and Buddhist mythology or cosmology, Mount Sumeru represents the axis mundi, the centre around which the whole of the world is built. And on Mount Sumeru, classically, it is said that the 6 realms that we find on the Wheel of Life are all to be found, and that so in other words, all beings exist on Mount Sumeru. It's surrounded by oceans, and those oceans are surrounded by chains of mountains that ring the mountain, and then beyond those chains of mountains there are the 4 great continents that lie at the 4 cardinal points, north, south, west and east, and the one of those continents is India, and this forms a whole world system, and Mount Sumeru is there at the centre of it. And so the connotation really is that, of course, the Buddha, the true Buddha, lies at the heart of reality. And of course, Buddha and reality, or Buddha and the true nature of things, is very much synonymous, particularly in the Mahayana. We remember that this was one of the big differences between the earlier and the developed teachings that became known as the Mahayana. That in the earlier teachings, the Buddha was very much the man who lived and died 2,500 years ago. But as time went on, it was realized that the true Buddha actually couldn't have been this man. That, so to speak, this man was a mouthpiece, a voice, a vehicle, but that the Buddha was something that could not be seen, and yet here it was acting. And out of this arose one of the later teachings from the Mahayana, known as the Trikaya, the 3 bodies of the Buddha. Where you have the body, what was known as the manifestation body, or the Nirmanakaya. This was the Buddha that lives and dies. This is the material body. And then there is the body of the teachings, which was known as the Sambhogakaya. This was the Buddha in the sort of teaching mode. But then there was the Dharmakaya, and this was known as the true body of the Buddha. And the Dharmakaya is the true nature. In Zen, it's sometimes called the true face, such as in the 6 patriarchs koan, before thinking of good and bad. What is the true face before father and mother were born? That true face is known as the Dharmakaya, and therefore such koans were known as the Dharmakaya koans, because they lead to the realization of the true nature being yet another name for the Dharmakaya. So we have the Buddha, who acts as the example. We have the teachings, and we also have the true nature. And that true nature, so to speak, is the culmination, the apotheosis of those teachings. So, in fact, if we really look, we can see that those 3 bodies are not 3 separate bodies. They're 3 aspects of one thing, a trinity. And so here we have the Buddha sitting on that lion throne at the centre of it all. And thereupon the young merchant bodhisattva Ratnakara, with 500 other merchant youths. And the purpose of making them merchants is really just to point out that they're lay people. This is the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra. We haven't met Vimalakirti yet. He appears in the 2nd chapter. But he too is a merchant. And that was one of the really important points of this sutra, is that it broke with the usual traditional idea that the practice and the attainment is something for people who have left the world by going into the forest, or left the world by going to the mountain peak, that these people are tradesmen. They're living ordinary lives like you and me. Where we read this word merchant, we could here say it was a shopkeeper, or an office worker, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or a banker, or somebody who was not working, say on benefits, something like that. It could be absolutely anybody in any walk of life, because by this point, and this is what really flows out of that other saying of the northern tradition, samsara is nirvana and nirvana is samsara, is that samsara and nirvana are no longer seen as 2 different places. We're not trying to escape from the world. Yes, we may go on the occasional retreats, but we always come back to the world. Even monks and nuns who live in temples and so forth are actually they don't lock themselves away. They're often extremely busy. It's a very interactive life with a community that has to be cared for and offer a sort of pastoral role to them as well. So there's no getting away from it. We carry our baggage with us, and this is the whole thing, that nirvana and samsara are not two different places, but they're actually the same place. It's just that for the one who sees nirvana, as it were, the scales have fallen from their eyes. They're the wrong views, or the false views, and particularly the false view of a separate self, and the attachment to the sense of I, me, and mine has become eroded and has been laid down. So Ratnakara, with his 500 followers, in fact, each of them are holding a precious parasol made of 7 different kind of jewels. And we can perhaps think of those parasols also as something that they themselves have created. Now they're going to make an offering of these things to the Buddha, but they're things that they themselves have actually made themselves. They're obviously very precious objects, and something that is precious to us means something to us, and we have an attachment to it inevitably as well. And a little bit, this can be taken to be something akin to, well, those things that I do hold very precious, even my ideals. And whilst it's necessary for us to have those ideals, we can become a little bit precious about them. And sooner or later, even those ideals do have to be laid down. And this is perhaps most startlingly spoken of in the Sermons of Master Rinzai, when one day he stood up before his monks and he said, if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. If you meet the patriarchs, kill the patriarchs. If you meet the father, kill the father. If you meet the mother, kill the mother. If you meet anything at all, kill it. Now, we have to remember, I mean, it sounds pretty startling anyway, but we have to remember this was being said to monks who had spent their whole lives in the monasteries. Probably they were given to the temple as boys, very young boys. All they would have known is Buddha, patriarchs, Buddhism, Buddha's teachings, the Buddhist ideal. And then suddenly for the master to stand up, who represents the living Buddha to those monks, of course, to turn round and say, kill these things. Quite something. For us, it might not be the Buddha. Most of us were probably not born Buddhists, and so we don't have that feeling. But if instead of Buddha, kill the patriarchs, whatever we see as our highest ideal, put that in its place, and then hear Master Rinzai saying, kill it. Why? Because whilst the consciousness is afflicted by the 3 passions, and those 3 passions are the support and foundation of that sense of I, then the heart is trapped. The heart will always be self-serving in the end. Even my highest ideals will, in the end, they will serve me. And I am very good at hiding behind them, and this is well known, and we only have to look at religious and political history. I mean, political ideals and religious ideals, they're all, if we look at them, if we just look at the written thing and see what those ideals are, they're always, I mean, how could anyone really want to disagree with them? They hold that sense of ideal. We look at them, we look up to them, and we realize that in them this is truly something to aspire towards. And then we compare that with the history, with actually what's happened in practice. And we can see just how those ideals have been warped and used by that sense of self, by that sense of I. And then I look at you, and you don't agree with my ideals quite. You must be mad. In fact, not only must you be mad, you're dangerous. And it's not many steps from there to full-out bloodshed and warfare and persecutions and so on. Well, we know this happens in our present day too. We are very quick to be taken over by the passions. And those passions have a door into us through the attachment to myself. And this is why the Buddha taught the laying down of myself. So, there they are. And there's even the greatest and the noblest and the most apparently altruistic as well, in the end has to be laid down. There's another story of the great Master Joshu. And one day a senior one of his monks, an old monk, came to him. And Master Joshu, being Master Joshu and having the wisdom eye, could see that this monk was ripe. And the monk had spent many years cultivating 2 exquisite bonsai trees, those little miniature trees that take a lot of care to cultivate, but look really beautiful. And he brought them as an offering to Master Joshu. And he brought them out of love for the Master, and deep respect and affection. And came before Master Joshu and inclined his head and raised up the bonsais and offered them to him. And Master Joshu looked and just roared, "Drop it!" Well, bonsai trees take about 10 to 15 years to cultivate. To suddenly walk before the Master and to hear, "Drop it!" And yet the monk had also been brought up to obey the Master. And so automatically one hand let go of the tree and it crashed to the ground, spoiling. But he couldn't let go of the other one. So again Master Joshu roared, "Drop it!" And this time those years of obedience and training took over, and the second one crashed to the floor. And the monk's heart, well, I'm sure we can imagine, that also crashed to the floor and broke too. And Master Joshu a third time roared, "Drop it!" The monk looked up and said, "But Master, I haven't got anything left to drop." And Master Joshu smiled and nodded at him and said, "Well then, in that case, take it away." In that moment, the monk awoke. And we may think, oh my God, does it really have to go through that? Well, it looks like the answer's yes. And we may think, well, that's just cruel. And what if it doesn't happen? But to be perfectly honest, life can be far crueler. And there are times when life puts us in that position of having taken something away from us. And to be perfectly honest, if we've not had the training of being able to lay ourselves down, then sometimes we can break because we stem ourselves against life and we refuse to accept it. Rather like the story of Kizukatami, which has been told before. She couldn't accept it. That's when it was her own child who died. And the Buddha fortunately was able to intervene. He could not take away that loss. You can't take away that loss. That's part of life. But what can happen is that we can learn to lay the heart down. And in that we discover actually we are not alone, as Kizukatami found out. And whilst it doesn't take away the loss, it actually reconnects us with life. And gradually we begin to see that this is the nature of all things. Impermanence is always at the heart of the Buddha's own teachings. So they then lay their parasols down at the Buddha's feet. And then it says, as soon as all these precious parasols had been laid down, suddenly by the miraculous power of the Lord, they were transformed into a single precious canopy, so great that it formed a covering for this entire billion-world galaxy. And then it goes on, as the sutras often do, to describe the contents of that billion-world galaxy in all its great detail. So we really get a sense of the vastness. And really what's being reflected here is remember that it says reflected in. What it is referring to, of course, is the nature of the universe itself. And I spoke earlier about that term Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya, which means the true body of the Buddha, or the true nature, is often synonymous with another term in Sanskrit called Dharma Dhatu. And Dharma Dhatu represents both the physical universe, the universe as it's seen and heard and smelt and tasted and touched, and also all the interior life as well, but also the principle upon which the universe is built. And of course the principle upon which the universe is built is emptiness, is shunyata, and shunyata and Buddha nature are synonymous. Buddha nature is the true nature of things as they are, and the true nature of things as they are is emptiness, that everything is emptiness, is shunyata. And so all that is together, as the Buddha said in the earliest teachings, in the Dhammapada, sorry, not in the Dhamma, in the Pali Canon, he said, there is, O monks, an unborn and an unformed and an unproduced. Were there not an unborn, unformed and unproduced, then that which is produced, formed and born could not exist. So here we see there's this interplay between what in the early teachings was called the unborn and that which is born, in other words, phenomena. It's not that these are two separate worlds, and this is important. Now we go back to that samsara is nirvana. It is not that the unformed exists in some other realm. For those who are familiar with Plato's world of forms, it's not that. It's that the world of forms actually exists inherently in forms. It's always in one and the same place. That sense of unity, that sense of oneness is always there. Otherwise, we would be seeking to escape all the time. So, actually, the Buddha on his lion throne, with this giant canopy, which obviously represents the Buddha heart, because it's the heart that reflects things as they really are, takes in the whole universe, and what is being pointed to is the vastness of it, but also that sense of oneness. And this is why, when it comes down to it, when we investigating our own nature, then we're not just doing it for myself alone. It's not just what's going on in my heart. There is no my heart. There's just this common human heart. And this is now where the interconnection between one's own training and the welfare of all beings comes in, because to understand one's own nature is simultaneously to understand all nature, because it's the same nature. If you like, it's a microcosm of all nature, or each being is a microcosm of all nature. So to understand one's own heart is to understand the human heart. Always this one and the same. And perhaps now we begin to get a little bit better an understanding of that bodhisattva vow, why it's there, to be of benefit to all sentient beings. This sense that in our day-to-day life, how we behave towards others is connected with how we behave towards ourselves. It's the same attitude. The Jungian psychologist James Hillman once put it like this, using the term human soul, which we could take when we use the word human heart or Buddha heart. It's the same thing. He says soul is not something that we possess inside us. Soul is something that we move through every day of our lives. In other words, in our encountering with others, in our relationships with others, in our encountering with inanimate objects, with the things around us. This is the Buddha heart. This is our own heart. There is no distance between the two. This is to really see this and to live out of this, is to live out of that Buddha heart. Then suddenly, actually that billion-world galaxy truly does become miraculous, and that sense of being cut off from it, that sense of loneliness and alienation that every eye feels, vanishes in that vision. And so this miracle of the parasol, this transfer over, this laying down of my parasol, those things that are precious to me, in that loss, in that giving away, there is the opportunity suddenly to wake up to that great vision of the interconnectedness, within which, that interstippledness, as Miyake used to call it, within which we all exist, we all come to be, and we all cease to be.